Everyone wants to have an effective and successful meeting with donors, but that's a lot easier said than done. I bet that you've been in at least one donor meeting where you didn't have a good plan. The donor said something unexpected, or it was hard to keep things on track. Now, it's unrealistic to assume that you can make every donor meeting go exactly to plan, but you can prepare yourself for whatever may come up by focusing on the right tools and strategies. That's why I'm handing off today's podcast episode over to Karen and Matt to share some of our top tips for how to successfully facilitate a donor meeting. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Nothing But Major Gifts podcast from Veritas Group, featuring Richard Perry and Jeff Schreifels. Twice a month, we bring you the latest and best thinking about major gift fundraising, so you can develop authentic relationships with your major donors. Here are your hosts, Richard and Jeff.
Welcome to the podcast today. I'm Karen Kendrick, and I'm with my colleague Matt, and we're excited to talk to you today about something that everyone has to do: effectively facilitate donor meetings. If you've been around for a little while, then you know that we use a conversational model called permission-based asking, where you play two roles, the partner and the facilitator. Today, we're going to focus on that second role and share some practical tips you can start using today. So Matt, let's get started talking a little bit about what are some of the common challenges that we all face related to meeting facilitation.
Yeah, Karen, a lot of times when we talk about the challenges that we face, they arise from this situation that I'm sure we're all familiar with. This pressure we have to get a certain number of meetings and to make a certain number of asks, and you've got these sort of numbers to hit. You've got these metrics around meetings, which ends up pushing that meeting into a transactional space. It makes it challenging to be present with the donor. It's hard when you're in that space. It doesn't allow you to focus on what the relationship needs to move forward. It's focused on, all right, so I'm going to meet, we're going to have coffee, then I'm going to go on to my next meeting, and we're going to have lunch, and then you're like thinking about your itinerary and hitting your metrics, and not necessarily being present for what the donor needs and what you need out of that meeting. And that's essentially the challenge, is if we go into a meeting without having a clear goal or a plan before the meeting. If we haven't thought through that, then we're gonna have a hard time accomplishing our goals, because we don't know where we're going. Time with your donor isn't enough of a reason to have a meeting, right? You've got to have some kind of desired outcome, and we coach folks on their donor engagement plan to have a non-financial goal for every single one of your donors, right? Where are they going? What is next in the relationship, and how is this meeting going to get them there? Like, what do you need out of this meeting to achieve your goals with your relationship with this
Wow,
donor,
Matt,
right?
I have to tell you, I'm getting like flashbacks from when I was a fundraiser and having some of those meetings that I was just having because I was supposed to have a meeting, and not being very clear on what I was trying to advance in the relationship. And so we'd be chatting away, and I could tell the donor's kind of like, why are we here? And I'm not stating clearly why we're there. I don't have like a purpose. And we have a nice conversation, but you can do that like once maybe, but then if you do that again and then again, that donors are like, what? They're not going to want to meet with you. It's a real waste of everyone's time. So, and I like how you brought in the fact that if our metrics are pressuring us, meetings, and it's not about advancing the relationship, then no matter how good a facilitator we are, if we're feeling like we need to meet with someone we don't really have a purpose at the moment, or meet to ask them for a gift, if we really don't have a relationship, then we're not going to be in our authentic selves because we don't feel right about it. So that's not going to be effective or
Right.
respectful.
You can't be present, like, and you just mentioned the donor, how they're feeling in that meeting too, where they're kind of waiting, like they know that you're a fundraiser and that it's your job to ask for money at some point, and so they're like, when's that going to happen? Is it going to happen now? Okay, all right, they're asking me about my kids. All right, we'll talk about the kids. Is it going to happen now? Oh, okay, so they're talking about something else now. And it's not having that clear, like not being very clear about where you're going or what you're trying to accomplish in the meeting, it's not good for you because you don't accomplish anything, and it's not good for the donor because they're kind of constantly on edge waiting for that other shoe to drop, right?
So one tip I would take away from the first part about the pressure is, if I am in a position where I can speak back, I would get clear about, okay, if I'm being asked to ask a certain amount for so many donors by the end of the year or something, I would look through my caseload of individual donors and see how many I actually have that are authentic and are ready for that. And I would sit down with my boss and have a conversation. Okay, and this is my plan, but I think it's gonna be more like March, not December. So being proactive and pushing back in a way that explains the story and the reason why, it would be powerful. And then what I hear you saying is, be really clear either before you get the meeting, or in getting the meeting, or at the meeting, the purpose of the meeting. And always tell donors, if I'm going to come ask for a gift, I'm going to let you know and get your permission. So you never have to sit there wondering, is it now? Is it now? Is it now? Because then they can relax and actually build a relationship.
Right. And you can't do any of that if you haven't thought through in your own mind. And so thinking about that pressure, there's trips that I've been on, I'm sure you've been on, where you're trying to pack as much as you can into the donor dollars paid for that flight, and they're paying for your rental car, and they're paying for your hotel. So you want to make sure you are seeing as many donors as possible, doing as much of the work as you can. And you get wrapped up into all right, if I'm sitting down, I got 45 minutes with this donor, then I got to get on the road so that I'm at the next place by the time that they and you're wrapped up in the doing of it and not being present in the relationship piece. The reverse can be true. We talk about not having a goal, and kind of having this aimless meeting, which can be a lot of fun, but ultimately doesn't accomplish anything. The reverse can be true, right? Where you can be too focused on your goal. And you just interrogate the donor, and you're just, I've got to find out this thing, or I've got to get to the ask, and I'm going to ask for $25,000, and then I'm going to find my opening, and we're going to do it. And so you just kind of hammer the donor with questions, there's even those moments where you're like, hey, we're going to talk about this proposal. I'm really excited to talk about this proposal. And they show up, and they're like, I was up all night because my mom's staying with us, and she's old, and she was getting out of bed and had a really hard time. So I'm having a hard time this morning focusing.
So let's talk
about let's talk about your $25,000 gift. Like, well,
so let's talk about a tip for that. Let's say if you're doing it right, then you're letting them know you're coming with an ask. So if you do show up and they're like, yeah, I had a really horrible night, my mom was yada yada yada, first of all, I'd be like, I'm so sorry you even came today. You really should have canceled. And they'll be like, no, I'm fine. So, we were going to talk about, a proposal today that, I feel like matches your interest and passions, but this may not be the right time for you. And, do you still want to go ahead and hear about that today and have that discussion and really dialogue about it, or is it better at another time? So this permission-based asking model gives us that tool to just ask permission. So we're wondering in our head, should I, shouldn't I, shouldn't I? And the cool thing is we just ask. Like, I'm sitting here wondering if I should even have this conversation with you because of, what you just went through. What do you need?
Yeah. And that can be so honoring for the donor to know that you heard them, that and that you care, like that you are willing to meet them where they are, and that you are perfectly willing to leave today without having made the ask and talked about the proposal, if that's what the donor needs. That can be such that posture can be so disarming and so honoring that it can go an awful long way.
So what I hear you saying is, be clear about the purpose of the meeting. Have spent some time planning and thinking ahead about the relationship you're building, the asks you have in the future, what you're doing to really steward and cultivate that donor. And then in the meeting itself, have the emotional intelligence to be present to where they are, what's coming up, and be able to pivot. And talk a little bit about that pivoting. What are some examples of that, Matt? Or how have you, seen some of the folks that you work with and coach every day do that pivot in meetings, where they're not holding on to their outcomes so tightly?
Right. And I think, that the the having thought through the goal and having thought through a couple of possible outcomes. I'm going to ask for money. They're going to say yes. We're going to celebrate. They're going to say maybe. They're going to say no. Like what? And then knowing that you are going to go and be present with the donor, and that may result in any number of directions that the conversation could go. That's the preparation piece. And then in the meeting, like, you'll notice, right, where you're kind of driving somewhere and they're kind of going somewhere else, or they're distracted, or they're they talk about how they gotta jump in like 20 minutes because they've got this other thing that just popped up, and they're really anxious. You can just, notice that, right? So be present enough to notice, and then name it. Use that, gosh, it really sounds like you're thinking ahead about this other thing that's going on. It sounds like that's really taking a lot of your attention right now. Should we talk about this another time?
Easy peasy. You just
Yeah.
asked. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Should we continue this conversation? I'm excited about this opportunity for you. And I know you're excited about this initiative. Should we have this conversation when you've got a little bit more space to be present on the in the discussion?
Mm-hmm. I love it. Yeah, or if you're going one direction, they keep going another.
Right.
It can be checking in on, when I brought up, the program we've been talking about, you mentioned some other pieces. Is that something now that you're even more interested in? Versus being like, oh my gosh, I got to wrangle them back to this one thing I have a proposal for. If they're not really excited about that, something shifted, you want to know in that moment, because then you can pivot. So let's say they no longer they found this new thing they really think is the cat's meow. And so you'd be like, well, you know what, today I came with a proposal for you around this. Would you still like to see that? Or would you be more interested in seeing what the needs are in that other area? Because would be exciting too. So that makes it a lot easier when you can just ask. I think I've said that about 10 times, but we don't do that. I didn't have that tool before. I was always trying to like guess and manipulate and figure it out.
Yeah, this, and we say this all the time, right? Like, we tell ourselves a story about the donor. Like, we're thinking about them a lot, and we're planning, and we're strategizing, and we've got, okay, we've talked to our boss, like, I'm going to make this ask, and the gift's going to be in by December, and we're going to be able to account for it and make our budget around. Like, we thought about all this stuff, and a lot's riding on it, right? People are depending on us to raise this money. And so we tell ourselves a story about the donor, and that can often intrude on the donor, the story the donor is telling us about themselves and where they are and what they're hoping to, what problems they're trying to solve, where their passions are, what they're hoping to get out of all of this. And we have to have some kind of plan. And there's this phrase in planning. It's from the military. No plan survives first contact. Right? You've got to have a plan, and you've also got to be just prepared to think on your feet and adjust based on the realities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you don't have to have all the answers. You can just come back, say, well, let's talk about that as much as I actually have information on, and let's come back and revisit. So. Cool. Anything else on some of the typical challenges and some tips, Matt?
Yeah, so some of the things that come up is, even if we're very good at facilitating a one-on-one meeting with a donor, and we're very good at we've thought through the goals, we know their passions, we're able to be present, we're able to facilitate. Sometimes we go on joint visits with our CEO or with the head of programming or whatever, a colleague, and we haven't fully prepared the two of us before we meet with the donor, or we haven't established our own roles, but yeah, internally, and the CEO, who's used to being the CEO, takes over the meeting and is talking a lot and is being the, kind of the center of attention, when really what we want out of the meeting is, something else. That can be a challenge, and I think everyone listening to this has probably been in that situation a little bit. I'd love to talk about some ways that we can get ahead of that, and also, if you notice it happening in the moment, like how do we pivot?
Yeah, I love that, because in permission-based asking model, which I think in your information there'll be how to look at the model and get more information in white papers and that kind of thing on how it works.
Yeah.
There is a whole process. And so you can sit down, like if you and I were going to work together, you're the head of program, and I know that you're chatty, then I just learned the other day that Matt can talk so fast if he wants to. I was so amazed. Let's say that you are a fast talking, chatty guy who's head of program. So I'm going to sit down with you. I'm going to talk through the model and explain how it works, and that what we're doing in each section of the model, and how there's transition questions, and that my role is to facilitate the meeting. So I'm going to keep us moving throughout the meeting. And, this is the part that I would love you to come in on, this piece, the curious part, where we're going to really break down the programming and how it works. And what I've been learning from Veritas and permission-based asking, use us as your reason, is that it's important not to do a presentation, but really do more of a discussion back and forth. So we're going to ask the donor what kind of questions have come up from them around this programming, kind of start there and see what kicks off. And then you can present some answers and some ideas for a few minutes, and then see what questions they have. So instead of doing a 5 or 10 minute monologue, it's a back and forth. And then because, we work together and we know each other, and I know you can talk fast and a lot, let's come up with a little fun way for me to give you a clue that you need to slow down your talking and take a breath, because you get so excited and passionate about it. Take a breath and ask, the donor where they are in their thoughts. So, you and I would come up with whatever that little cue needs to be. Or we would just tell the donor at the beginning of the meeting, Matt is so passionate about all of this and starts talking so much, I'm probably going to interrupt him and redirect at times and ask you questions, because he just has so much to share and it's really exciting. I would probably do something like that, just so it's just a natural thing, versus I'm like doing some kind of weird signal that the person's like, what are they doing? Like scratching my left ear.
Yeah, right. You're gonna take care of that ear problem, Karen. That's
yeah, and if it's a CEO that likes to chat a lot, like talk through, like let's say they usually have a shtick they give that takes 15 minutes or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It can be like, how can we get that down to 8 minutes or 5 minutes? And sometimes they're just going to do their 10-minute spiel. So what can you do around that?
Yeah.
That creates, or maybe you can say to the CEO, if you don't mind, in the middle there, I'm going to jump in a few times to ask some questions and bring.
What's a natural pause? Like, let's pause. Like, that's a lot. Can we just what's coming up for you, donor, as we're, as you're hearing this, you can tell, we're very passionate about this. We can't stop talking about it. This is how fast I can talk. It's Minnesota, Karen, because we get cold up here, so we got to talk fast.
You got to talk fast. You're warming up your body. You're like creating a little warming machine.
That's right. Yeah. We can't keep our mouths open for a long time, because otherwise the cold air gets in and freezes our lungs. That's how, it's just science. It's just
totally scientific. Okay. So, anything else?
So we've talked a little bit about what has to happen before the meeting, right? So there's that preparation you do with your partners. There's the preparation you do as you're thinking about the purpose of the meeting, the goals, what do you need out of it? There's in the meeting, we talked about where, how you're able to be present, how you can pivot, some facilitation questions that can help you move forward, or even just name when there's a mismatch, or interrupting your CEO. Not always an easy thing to do. And I think it's worth mentioning, Karen, post meeting, especially if you're on that hamster wheel and you're like, sweet, I got the meeting, I did, we made the ask, or I got permission to submit a proposal or whatever, I accomplished my goals, great. Now I'm on to the next thing, and I'm going to the thing, and got to get on the road, get to the airport, to get to the, the follow-up and the notes and what we learned and what the next steps are and who's doing what and all of the stuff that needs to get entered in the database. All of that is part of the meeting, right? And I think it's worth naming, like, these are not your donors, they're the organization's donors. They had a meeting with you, but they had a meeting with your organization. And so the organization needs to know, should something happen to you, or should whatever it needs to get entered, your plans need to get adjusted based on what happened in the meeting. And that all needs to be captured, and the follow-up needs to happen after the meeting. The meeting's not over when the meeting's over, right? You've got to do that post-meeting work.
Yeah, I love that that's still part of the meeting, because I remember thinking, oh, I'll remember that. And like by the end of the day, it's totally gone. Like I have no idea what happened in that meeting. And so I know some fundraisers sit in their car with their laptop and just quickly have like 3 things, any notes that they want to highlight, any next steps. And if you're lucky enough to have any assistant, they could send that right away and have other folks enter it. If not, then you can enter them all together at some point. That's really valuable.
Yeah, I definitely tried to always plan in my itineraries, a few minutes in the parking lot afterwards, where I'm sitting in the car and I'm just jamming notes down. So I've got the highlights, and then as I'm putting those notes later in the database, or typing them up or whatever, some other stuff will come back and I'll remember it, and I can adjust. But that's, building that into your plan, so you're not so squeezed. Or if you are squeezed because you're on the road and that's the way it works, and you're double lunching, and you got to get from one to the next quick, building into your day when you do those notes, whether it's at night at the hotel or whatever.
Cool.
So Karen, we've thrown a lot of tips out there already, and we've talked through some permission-based asking model, so some elements from that. Can we just kind of dive in a little bit more into that? We don't have our graphic that we can show, and if we did, people who are driving or jogging or working in the yard, you shouldn't be looking at the graphic anyways. But it's available. But so can we talk through some of that, and how that model helps us in our facilitator role?
Yes. So the model is cool. It starts with connect and ends with celebrate. So connect is the chit chat. And the chit chat's good because it's not just to be friendly and be social. It also helps people mentally get in the room. You don't know what they were just doing beforehand. You kind of need to settle into a new space. Of course, you do that according to that person's personality, maybe longer or shorter, depending on the person. Some folks just want to get right down to business after saying, good to see you. And then you always end in celebrate, which is telling a little story of impact that the donor has made because of their giving through the years. And I heard one fundraiser talk about a donor. They were going to ask them for an increase, and the donor came in that meeting shared that their business is struggling and they weren't able to give. I think they gave $10,000 every year for multiple years. And so they were going to ask for an increase, which is logical. And so the donor felt so badly that they had to say they're going to give less, but the fundraiser was ready with that celebrate. Oh, not a problem. Thank you for letting me know. You're my partner. That's the other thing we talk about in PBA. Donors are your partner in the sense that you're having authentic conversations about where they are, what they know and don't know, what their concerns are. And you're teaching them about systems and structures and how things work as well. So you're a true partner. So they shared with that donor the impact of their giving with a great story. And the donor came back the next day and just said, wow, as soon as I have my revenue going again, you're going to be my #1 organization, because I felt so seen, heard, respected, cared about. So, and then there's a circle in the middle where you align on why you're there and the roles and the timing. You go to that be curious, that asking questions, learning about more about their interest and passions, or what they pulled out of the proposal you sent that stood out to them, or the questions that, whatever the be curious needs to be, where you're really having dialogue back and forth and they're sharing things and you're listening for little key elements that you can then bring back. And the cool thing is, the next thing is the ask, whatever that might be, asking to come to an event, join a board, give a gift, their communication preference, whatever the ask might be. And then you go back to align, check in on, okay, next steps, and then you end with that celebrate. And I like that it's circular, because many of the models are linear, thinking that, meetings always sort of go in this order. And the circle helps you go back around when things go sideways. Like you said earlier, donor doesn't seem that interested in the thing that you think they want to talk about. And then you can go back to be curious and be like, okay, so it seems like maybe there's something else that's interesting you. And you can go back around the circle, come up with the ask might be the next step on what information they're interested in. And then the align would be how you're going to do that and the timing. So it's a very helpful tool. The beautiful thing too is every arrow in this tool is a yes, no question that helps you in your facilitation. So not everybody's trained to be a facilitator. Facilitators' jobs are to be present, listen to where people are, but have an agenda and a process they're trying to move people through. So it's this interesting dance between where people are, where the energy is, and where you're trying to go. So you're doing both things at once. And the arrows help you do that. So let's say you've been like even just chatting away at the beginning, you got a really chatty donor. They had a great time at they're in Turks and Caicos, yada, yada, yada. And it feels weird to say, okay, so you're ready to talk about X, Y, Z. So a simple thing like, are you ready to get started? Is a great way to be like, oh yeah, let's get into the meetings. That's why we're here anyway, right? Instead of just feeling like, I don't know when to jump in and do it. Other parts of the arrow might be, and once you sort of talk about the meeting and why you're there, you start by saying, do you mind if I ask some questions about the proposal I just sent, or ask some questions about, I would like to learn more about your interest and passions. You're asking permission to jump into a Q&A and a real discussion time. So the donor is cued into what's coming next, and they feel, and you're able to then keep moving the process forward. So let's say you're in that be curious, you're really diving into a donor's interest and passions, you're finding out they really love a certain program. And so you're seeing that there's like, 8 minutes left of the meeting. You want to bring it all the way back around. So you can say, do you mind if I ask you a few questions about next steps? And so that just gets you, okay, now we're out of discussion, we're into the next phase. And so the arrows give you those yes, no questions to keep it moving. And then because it's permission-based, let's say you're really talking about a program, the person's really interested, and you only have 5 minutes left, you can say things like, hey, I'd love to close this out and make sure I'm coming back with the right next steps for you. Seems like you've got a lot of energy and a lot more you want to learn. I've got a few ideas about how we might do that. Would you like to hear those? So you make sure you end with clarity and permission from them for the next step. Then, because I know I've ended meetings where, oh yeah, we could do this next. And then I'm chasing them down via email, via phone, trying to get them to say yes to the next step, where if they say yes to the next step in the meeting, it's much easier to get that next step to happen.
And all you're doing is just following, because each step of the way, each one of these arrows, like you said, each moving from connect to align to be curious, curious to ask to align again, and then to celebrate. Each of those arrows is an opportunity for them to say no, and they don't say no, right? They've said yes every single time, and so they're with you. Then you guys are partners, and you are talking about something you both care about, and that's what's so powerful about this.
The other thing, in the initial time you meet, you're sort of retraining your donors on what meetings are going to be like with you, because donors have probably had a lot of meetings where they didn't know what it was about, right? So in that initial meeting, you're talking about your role as facilitator and asking permission. So, what I'd like to do in meetings when we meet is I'll facilitate and keep us moving. We're going to agree on the objective, but I'll keep us moving. Is that okay with you? That really helps you with that chatty donor, or really helps you with a donor that you're not sure is aligned with where you are, because then you've gotten permission to be the guide. And then you also talk about how you're the partner. And so anytime during the meeting you want to hear back what they're not understanding, what they're not getting, that this is a journey together of learning and exploring. And so that gives them like permission to be like, no, I really don't feel like I know enough yet to be asked about, about giving to this. So I feel like there's some things that I have some questions around. So that is really helpful in empowering them in the process.
I love it. I love it. So again, you're going for a walk, you are driving in your car, you are not looking at this permission-based asking model.
We're
Please,
tempting you to look at it and to
we
come
want
into
you,
the
we want
PBA
you to come
world.
back and look at it at a time when it would be safe for you to do so without endangering yourself and others. You can find that all over our website. Our content has this permission-based asking model all over the place. It's easy to find. It should not take much for you to do it, but do look at it and do use that as a tool as you think about planning out your meetings. Okay, so what is my ask for this meeting? If I'm not asking for money, am I asking for, what am I asking for? Am I asking for them to do, you're asking for something in every meeting, but it's usually not money, or it can be, it's not always. So what's your ask? What do you need to know to get to that ask? That's to be curious. What do you want to connect over? What do you remember about your donor that you're going to ask about as part of that connection piece? So what's the story? What's the anecdote you're going to bring for Celebrate? So use this model to prepare for your meetings, and we'll go from there. I think one thing to think about is it can be if you're looking at that permission-based asking model and you connect to align to be curious, curious to ask to align, and then Celebrate. It can be really comfortable going from connect to align and align to be curious. That often happens in natural conversation. You're connecting, you're hearing things, and you're like, yeah, let's talk about the organization we both love. And boy, tell me more about what got you started here. You've been on the board for 8 years. That's amazing. I've only been here for 18 months, but boy, you've really put in a lot of time, talent, and treasure with this organization. And tell me more about what keeps you coming back. What gives you all this energy? And you can live in that space for a long time. Often we don't move from that be curious into the ask, either because we don't know where we're going with the meeting, or because for some other reason we're afraid, it doesn't feel right, it feels awkward to kind of nudge things along when you feel so connected to the donor in the pleasant conversation of connecting and being curious. But I would encourage you to know where you're going, and to have the confidence and the strength to go there.
Well, I love that example. So let's say you really want to ask that board member to be a volunteer solicitor. So you're having all that chat, you're learning about them, and you would, ahead of time, you would want to let them know that you're interested in talking to them about their engagement with fundraising, so that they have a heads up that that's what it's about. And so then you can say, it's been wonderful getting to know you and hear more about the history of the organization. You have so much knowledge and wisdom. Are you open to hearing some ideas and questions I have for your involvement in fundraising? And then you come with, would you be open to being a volunteer solicitor with us? And this is what it would look like or sound like, and then have that discussion. And so to me, especially with someone that's been there a long time, you're in a different power position, all that, it can feel awkward. And this gives you a way to do it that's so respectful.
I love it. I love it. Well, Karen, can we think of anything else that we need to, any tips or other things we want to talk about to help folks facilitate meetings?
Just remember that you personally have your own system to manage in all of this, and so does the donor. So it's very easy to go into fight and flight, get nervous, start going to a space where it's harder to be present and really creative and empathetic because you're worried about performing and doing it perfectly, right? Or making a mistake. And so we go into fight and flight. Our whole physiology is preparing to run from the big lizard, which is not the warm, present fundraiser you want to be. So you want to work on some tools to prepare beforehand and during. There's a lot of breathing tools and centering tools that help you prepare and get yourself back to the present. Something as simple as during the meeting, if you start feeling nervous, wiggle your toes. You want to get your back into your body and back present. Breathing in your nose and out your mouth slowly. We have a centering practice where I'll just run through it really quickly. This will bring you back into a present space. You want to uncross your arms and legs. You want to, instead of breathing in and out, breathe up and down. So you want to breathe up in your nose and down out your mouth. And you want to think of something that makes you smile and actually let yourself smile a little bit. Of course, you can't be you have to be subtle doing this in your donor meeting. Breathe up.
What are you smiling about over there? Yeah.
And you want to imagine there's a nice bubble around you and include your donor in your bubble. And what this does is, with the breath and the smile and the bubble, it brings in oxytocin, which is sort of that warm chemical substance that makes how we feel when we give our kids a hug. That's oxytocin. So it brings your body back into that space versus, I want to run out of here space. So that helps you when you're wanting to close out the meeting fast because it's feeling uncomfortable, or you're not sure what to do and you're feeling a little lost, to kind of get yourself back to present. All I have to do is be present, ask questions about where they are and what they need. And that will bring you, it'll just help you bring all the resourcefulness that we know you have within you. So I hope these tips are helpful to you and gave you some new strategies for approaching your next donor meeting. And thank you, Matt, for joining me today.
Yeah.
If you'd like to learn more about how to properly facilitate a donor meeting and have permission-based conversations with your donors, check out our online course on making effective donor asks. You can sign up for this course whenever it works for your schedule and learn the core principles of this model that you can use to have transformational conversations. If you want to learn more, head to the show notes or to our website. Take care and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Nothing But Major Gifts podcast from Veritas Group. Richard and Jeff also write an ongoing blog that you can subscribe to for free at veritasgroup.com. Please join us again next time.